The moment the lawyer opened the envelope, my sister was already smiling. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a confident smile. As if she knew exactly what was about to happen. The room was full. Uncles, cousins, old neighbors, all gathered to hear our father's last wishes. But it was my sister who broke the silence. She leaned forward, crossed her arms, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This house is mine." Some people laughed, thinking it was a joke. The lawyer didn't laugh. He stopped reading. He slowly raised his eyes and asked something no one expected. "I need absolute silence, because what comes next changes everything." It was at that moment that I realized something was wrong. My sister's smile disappeared. Her hands began to tremble. And I understood, too late, that this reading wasn't about inheritance. It was about secrets buried for decades. And someone in that room was about to lose much more than a house. Short pause. And the worst part. The first name the lawyer read wasn't hers. People like to believe that houses are just walls, wood, and memories. But our house was a battlefield long before anyone died. It stood at the end of a quiet street, white porch, tall windows, a tree in the front yard that my father refused to cut down no matter how sick it became. He used to say the tree was family. That should have been the first warning, because in that house, family didn't mean love. It meant control. My sister Eleanor was older than me by 4 years. 4 years doesn't sound like much. But in that house, it made her powerful. She learned early how to read people, how to tilt her head just right, how to cry without tears, how to speak softly while cutting deep. And my father, he admired that. He called it strength. When she spoke, he listened. When I spoke, he corrected. If Eleanor broke something, it was an accident. If I did, it was carelessness. At dinner, my father would ask her opinion about adult things, money, repairs, decisions. I was told to finish my food and be quiet. And slowly, without anyone ever saying it out loud, the rules became clear. The house belonged to Eleanor. I just lived in it. That house wasn't just where we slept. It was where my father hosted people he wanted to impress. Where he held power without ever raising his voice. Where every photo on the wall told a very specific story. One where Eleanor stood closer to him than anyone else. There was a framed picture in the hallway. My father, Eleanor, the house behind them. I wasn't in it. I asked once why. He said, "You took the picture." I was 7. Our mother existed in the house like a shadow. She cooked, she cleaned, she smiled when guests were around, but she never spoke at dinner unless spoken to. And when she did, Eleanor would correct her. Not openly, not rudely, just enough to remind everyone who held the upper hand. "Actually, Dad, that's not what you said last week." "No, Mom, the papers go in the other drawer." "You're remembering it wrong." My father never defended her, and one day, she stopped defending herself. I remember the night clearly. Rain hitting the windows, the tree outside creaking like it was trying to leave. My parents argued behind a closed door. I couldn't hear the words, just the tone. My father's voice was low and steady. My mother's was shaking. Then Eleanor walked past my room. She didn't look worried. She didn't look scared. She looked prepared. The next morning, my mother was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. My father said she needed time. Eleanor said she was weak, and the house became quieter, too quiet. After that, we didn't ask questions. You didn't ask questions in that house. You observed. You adapted. You learned what not to say. Eleanor took my mother's place at the table. Same chair, same posture. And slowly, the house began to respond to her. Her footsteps echoed louder. Her opinions became rules. Her presence filled every room. If I disagreed, I was ungrateful. If I hesitated, I was disrespectful. And my father watched with approval. When I was 16, I told my father I wanted to leave for college far away. He didn't look up from his papers. Eleanor laughed. "Why would you do that?" she said. "This is your home." But the way she said it, it wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. My father finally looked at me. "You don't abandon family," he said. "And you don't abandon the house." That was the first time I realized something terrifying. The house wasn't meant to shelter us. It was meant to keep us in place. Years passed. Eleanor stayed. I left anyway. But no matter how far I went, the house followed. Every holiday invitation came with conditions. Every phone call ended with updates about renovations, improvements, plans. Her plans. "She's taking care of things," my father would say. "She understands what this house needs." What he meant was, she understands how to keep control. So when I walked back into that living room years later, older, quieter, more aware, everything felt exactly the same. Same couch, same smell of old wood and authority, same framed photo. Eleanor sat where my father used to sit, confident, relaxed, like a queen waiting for her crown. And when she leaned forward and said, "This house is mine," it wasn't arrogance, it was habit. Because for her, the house had always belonged to her, or so she thought. As the lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, I saw something flicker across my sister's face. Not fear, confusion, because the envelope in his hands was older than she expected, and the ink on the seal was written the same year our mother disappeared. Pausa. That was the first time I wondered, what if the house never belonged to my sister? What if it was waiting for the truth to come out? The lawyer didn't rush. That was the first thing that unsettled everyone. He adjusted the papers slowly, as if time itself had suddenly become fragile, as if one wrong word could shatter something that had been carefully held together for decades. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, chin slightly raised. She wasn't worried. She had lived her whole life assuming the outcome. The living room felt smaller than I remembered. Too many people. Too much history pressed into the walls. My aunt sat rigid on the edge of the couch. A cousin stared at the floor, already bored. Someone coughed, then immediately apologized, as if noise itself had become disrespectful. The lawyer finally spoke. "This will," he said, "was drafted in multiple stages." Eleanor smiled. Multiple stages meant planning. Planning meant intention. And intention meant control. "The property," the lawyer continued, "is not directly transferred to any individual upon my client's death." The smile froze, not vanished, not cracked, frozen. Eleanor's eyes narrowed just enough to notice. Someone shifted uncomfortably. "What does that mean?" my aunt asked. The lawyer didn't answer her. He looked straight at Eleanor. "It means," he said carefully, "that the house enters a period of conditional hold." I felt my pulse in my ears. Eleanor uncrossed her arms. "There are requirements," the lawyer went on, "that must be fulfilled before ownership can be assigned." Eleanor laughed softly. "Requirements?" she said. "This isn't a game." The lawyer nodded. "No," he replied. "It's a safeguard." That word, safeguard, landed wrong. Eleanor straightened in her chair. "My father trusted me," she said. "He wouldn't leave something unfinished." The lawyer finally broke eye contact with her. "He did trust you," he said. "That's why this clause exists." The room changed after that. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like the moment before a storm when birds stop making noise. I saw it in Eleanor's hands. She clasped them together, then released them. Again. Again. A habit. A crack. "There is," the lawyer said, lifting a thinner envelope. An addendum. The paper was yellowed, the seal faded. Old. This addendum predates the final version of the will by nearly 20 years. 20 years. The same number echoed in my head. Eleanor spoke too quickly. Why was that never mentioned before? Because, the lawyer said, it was not meant to be activated unless specific conditions were met. And were they? She snapped. He nodded. Yes. The lawyer cleared his throat. The addendum begins with a declaration. He paused, then read, in the event that my death occurs without full disclosure of past events related to my spouse's departure. I stopped breathing. So did Eleanor. The word departure hung in the air like an accusation disguised as politeness. Ownership of the property shall remain suspended. My aunt whispered, spouse, as if she had forgotten my mother existed. Eleanor turned toward me. Not fully, just enough. Her eyes searched my face, fast and sharp, like she was checking whether I knew something. I didn't react. I couldn't. Because something inside me had just unlocked. My father hadn't written this for strangers. He'd written it for us. This is ridiculous, Eleanor said. My mother left. Everyone knows that. The lawyer didn't argue. He simply flipped the page. This document, he said, does not use the word left. He looked up. It uses the word withheld. Silence crashed down hard. Withheld? Someone asked. The lawyer nodded. Yes, as in information withheld, truth withheld, circumstances withheld. Eleanor stood up. You're implying something, she said sharply. No, the lawyer replied. I'm reading something. That distinction mattered. The house, he continued, cannot be transferred until the circumstances surrounding my wife's absence are formally acknowledged. Acknowledged, not investigated, not proven, acknowledged. By whom? The lawyer answered before anyone could ask. By the family. That's absurd, Eleanor shouted. The room flinched. She had never raised her voice in that house before. My father would never tie the house to gossip. The lawyer looked at her with something close to pity. He didn't, he said. He tied it to the truth. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. There is one individual whose acknowledgement carries more weight than any other. Eleanor's face drained of color. She knew. Before he even said it. The lawyer turned his head. Toward me. The acknowledgement, he said, must come from the younger child. Every sound disappeared. Eleanor slowly turned. Her expression wasn't anger, it was calculation. Before I could speak, the lawyer raised his hand. This reading is not complete, he said. And what comes next? He paused. Cannot be undone. Eleanor stared at me like I had just become a threat. Because for the first time in her life, the house was no longer listening to her. I hadn't planned to speak. That was the truth. I came to the will reading prepared to listen, to endure, and to leave. I didn't come armed with memories or accusations. I came with distance, with years of silence carefully folded inside me. But when the lawyer said my name, when he said the acknowledgement had to come from me, something shifted. Not in the room, in me. I realized then that my silence had never been neutral. It had been useful, convenient, protective. For Eleanor. The lawyer waited, patient in a way that felt deliberate, as if he understood that this wasn't about legal language anymore. This was about permission. I looked around the room, at faces that suddenly felt unfamiliar, people who had known my mother only as a footnote, as a woman who couldn't handle things, a woman who needed time. Eleanor was still standing. Her posture was perfect, her expression controlled. But her eyes were wrong. They weren't angry. They weren't scared. They were alert, like someone watching a door they hoped would never open. I took a breath. And for the first time in years, I spoke about that night. I said I remembered the rain, how heavy it was, how it soaked the ground so completely that the earth smelled torn open. I remembered lying awake, listening to voices behind my parents' door, my father's voice steady, my mother's breaking. But what I had never said, what no one had ever asked, was what happened after the door opened, because it wasn't my father who came out first. It was Eleanor. She walked down the hallway like she already knew the argument was over, like the outcome had been decided without witnesses. She didn't look at me when she passed my room. She didn't slow down. She went straight to the kitchen, and I followed. I told the room how I stood at the corner, half hidden, watching my sister pour herself a glass of water with hands that didn't shake at all, how she drank slowly, calmly. Then my mother came in. Her face was pale, her eyes red. She looked smaller somehow, like the house had finally rejected her. She said something to Eleanor. I couldn't hear the words. But I heard Eleanor's response, clear, controlled, final. You're not taking anything with you. The room reacted before Eleanor did. A sharp inhale, a shifting of bodies. Someone whispered my mother's name like it was a ghost. Eleanor finally spoke. That's not what happened. Her voice was steady. Too steady. I didn't look at her. I kept going. I said my mother turned toward the back door. How she hesitated there, one hand on the handle, like she was waiting for someone, anyone, to stop her. No one did. Not my father, not Eleanor, and not me. I said I watched her step into the rain with no coat, no bag, no plan. And then Eleanor closed the door behind her, locked it. The lawyer didn't interrupt. Neither did Eleanor. She knew better. I told them that the next morning. When I asked where Mom was, Eleanor answered before my father could. She left, she said. Some people don't belong in strong families. That was the story that stuck. That was the version repeated until it sounded like truth. But then the lawyer spoke again, quietly. And did she leave any belongings behind? I nodded. All of them. Clothes, jewelry, papers, photographs, even her shoes. Eleanor shifted. Just once. Enough. The lawyer reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. These were found in a locked drawer in the study, he said, hidden behind tax records. He opened it. Inside were copies of letters, written by my mother, unsent. Pages and pages of words she never had the chance to say out loud. They weren't dramatic. They weren't accusations. They were questions. Why are you shutting me out? Why does Eleanor speak for you? Why do I feel like a guest in my own home? One letter stopped the room entirely. It was dated 2 days before she disappeared. If I leave, it read, it won't be because I want to. It will be because I was told I no longer belong. No one looked at Eleanor now. They looked at the floor, at the walls, at the house. Eleanor laughed then. A sharp, brittle sound. So what? She said. She was unstable. Everyone knew that. The lawyer closed the folder. There is more, he said. He pulled out a second document, a handwritten note, signed by my father. I failed her, it said, and I let my daughter learn the wrong lesson. Eleanor went pale, not slowly, instantly. The lawyer continued. This note was written 3 years after your wife disappeared, he said. On the same day this addendum was drafted. I felt something collapse in my chest, not relief, not victory, grief, because my father had known, and he had waited too long. Eleanor stepped forward. You're twisting things, she said. She was weak. I protected this family. I finally looked at her. No, I said. You protected the house. That did it. Her composure shattered. She told the room that my mother was emotional, that she cried too much, that she undermined our father, that someone had to step up. She was embarrassing us, Eleanor said. And you all let her." The room stayed silent, not in agreement, in horror. The lawyer spoke one last time. "The will states that any attempt to deny or distort these events constitutes refusal to acknowledge," he said. "And refusal triggers the final clause." Eleanor's voice cracked. "What clause?" The lawyer looked at her. "The house is to be sold," he said, "and the full account made public." Eleanor sank back into her chair. For the first time, the house didn't respond to her at all. And as I sat there, listening to the echo of truths finally spoken, I understood something devastatingly clear. My sister didn't want the house because it was home. She wanted it because it remembered everything. And now, it was finally speaking back. No one spoke after the lawyer said the house would be sold. The words didn't land like a decision. They landed like a threat. Eleanor sat frozen, her hands resting on her knees as if she were afraid to touch anything else in the room. The walls, the furniture, even the air between us suddenly felt hostile to her. For the first time since I could remember, the house wasn't on her side. The lawyer waited, letting the silence do its work. Then he stood. And when he did, I realized this wasn't just a reading anymore. It was a reckoning. He walked toward the bookshelf that lined the far wall, the one my father never let anyone rearrange. He ran his fingers along the spines, stopping at a row of old ledgers that looked decorative, but had never been opened by guests. "These," he said, pulling one free, "were not books your father collected." Eleanor shook her head immediately. "That's not relevant." The lawyer ignored her. "They are records," he said, "and they explain why the house was never meant to be inherited quietly." He opened the ledger. Inside were handwritten numbers, dates, transfers, amounts too large to be casual and too precise to be accidental. My aunt leaned forward. "What is that?" "Maintenance," Eleanor snapped. "My father's business." The lawyer turned a page. "No," he said. "It's laundering." The word sucked the oxygen out of the room. He explained slowly, deliberately, how the house had been used as a front. How shell companies had moved money through renovations, repairs, and property investments that never existed beyond paperwork. The house hadn't just held memories. It had hidden crimes. I remembered all the construction over the years. Walls moved. Rooms added. Contractors paid in cash. Always cash. Eleanor stood up again. "You can't prove any of that," she said. The lawyer didn't argue. He reached into his briefcase and placed photographs on the table. Blueprints, original ones, with markings that didn't match the final structure. "Hidden compartments," he said. "False walls, storage spaces sealed behind renovations." My stomach tightened. I knew exactly where one of those spaces was. My father had shown me once, late at night, after too much whiskey and too much silence. He told me, "Some things are safer when they don't exist." The lawyer continued. These compartments were documented, inspected, and later, concealed. Eleanor's voice dropped. "By whom?" The lawyer met her eyes. "By you." She laughed again, but this time it came out wrong. Too loud, too fast. "I was a child." "You were 19, the lawyer said, "and you signed the permits." That hit harder than anything else. 19. Old enough to know, old enough to choose. The lawyer turned to me. "Do you remember the study renovation?" he asked. I nodded. The smell of fresh paint. My mother already gone. Eleanor directing workers like she owned the place. "That renovation sealed the last compartment," he said, "along with its contents." Someone whispered, "What contents?" The lawyer didn't answer immediately. He opened another folder. Inside were copies of identification documents, names I didn't recognize, and one photograph, a woman standing in front of the house. Younger, tired, familiar. My mother. Eleanor's breath hitched. These individuals, the lawyer said, were tied to the accounts. Some disappeared. Some were paid to disappear. He let that sit. And your mother, he continued, found out. The room tilted. She didn't leave because she was weak, he said. She left because she was afraid. Eleanor slammed her hand on the table. That's a lie. The lawyer finally raised his voice. No, he said. What's a lie is that she was allowed to take anything with her. He turned to me. Do you remember what she asked you for the night she left? I hadn't thought about it in years, but the memory was there. Clear. She asked for her papers, I said, her passport. Eleanor's head snapped toward me. She told her she didn't need them. I continued, that everything she needed was already gone. The lawyer nodded. Because without identification, he said, she couldn't report what she knew. Eleanor looked around the room, at faces that no longer saw her as strong, only dangerous. The lawyer closed the ledger. This house, he said, was never an inheritance. It was insurance. Insurance against exposure. Insurance against justice. He paused. And now that insurance is void. Eleanor whispered, You can't take it from me. The lawyer corrected her. It was never yours. Outside, the wind picked up. The old tree in the front yard creaked loudly, its branches scraping the side of the house like fingers trying to get in, or out. I realized then that every renovation, every locked drawer, every rule Eleanor enforced had one purpose, to keep the house from telling its story. But stories don't stay buried forever. And as the lawyer gathered his documents, preparing to read the final section, Eleanor looked at me with something new in her eyes. Not hatred, not fear, panic. Because she understood what was coming next. The house wasn't just being taken away, it was about to be opened. Completely. The moment the lawyer closed his briefcase, Eleanor knew. Not intellectually, not logically. She knew the way animals know when the ground beneath them is no longer solid. Her confidence didn't vanish all at once. It fractured. Small breaks at first, tightness around her mouth, a stiffness in her shoulders, until even her posture betrayed her. This is a setup, she said. Her voice was lower now, controlled again. A last attempt to regain the shape she'd worn her whole life. The lawyer didn't sit. He remained standing, like someone preparing to deliver a sentence rather than read a document. This house will be placed under review, he said. Effective immediately. Eleanor laughed softly. You can't do that without my consent. I don't need it, he replied. She turned to the room. You all know me, she said. You know what I've done for this family. No one answered. She scanned their faces, searching for allies. There were none. The aunt who once praised her discipline stared at her hands. The cousin who used to ask her advice avoided her eyes. Silence, Eleanor had taught us, was power. Now it was judgment. This house was built to last, Eleanor said. My father wanted it protected. The lawyer nodded. He did, he said. From you. That broke something. Eleanor stepped forward. You think you're better than me? She snapped at me. You left. You abandoned us. You let me handle everything. I met her gaze. You didn't handle it, I said. You controlled it. Her face twisted. Someone had to be strong. No, I said. Someone had to be human. The word hit harder than any accusation. Her breath quickened. She looked at the lawyer again. You can't prove intent, she said. There's no crime in protecting property. There is, he replied, when property is used to imprison truth. He opened the final folder. This section, he said, was written in anticipation of your response. Eleanor froze. The lawyer read. In the event that Eleanor refuses acknowledgement, attempts deflection, or exhibits coercive behavior, she forfeits all claims. Eleanor's hands shook. This is insane. It's specific, the lawyer said. She turned on me. You planned this, she accused. You came here to take everything. I shook my head. I didn't come to take anything, I said. I came because I was tired of lying. That's when she screamed. Not words, sound. Raw and sharp and completely uncontained. The house echoed it back. The tree outside scraped harder against the wall. Someone stood up. Then another. People began to leave the room, not dramatically, quietly, one by one. Each departure stripped something from her. Authority, witnesses, control. You can't leave, Eleanor shouted. This is my house. No one listened. The lawyer waited until the room was nearly empty. Then he said the sentence Eleanor had spent her entire life trying to outrun. You are no longer welcome here. She stared at him. I grew up here. So did the truth, he replied. You just locked it away. Eleanor sank into the chair. Her strength collapsed inward, folding like paper underwater. She whispered, I did what I had to. I walked closer. For who? I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it, because there was no answer that didn't condemn her. The lawyer gathered his papers. Investigators will arrive within the week, he said. You are advised to remove personal items only. Eleanor laughed weakly. You think they'll believe you? They already do, he said. She looked up at me one last time. Her eyes weren't sharp anymore. They were empty. And in that emptiness, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not power. Fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when there's nothing left to control. As I turned to leave, Eleanor spoke softly. If she hadn't been so weak. I stopped and said the final thing she would ever hear from me. She wasn't weak, I said. She was trapped. The house creaked around us, like it agreed. I didn't return to the house right away. After the reading, after the silence, after Eleanor's collapse, something inside me understood that going back too soon would only reopen wounds that had just begun to close. The house had spoken, loudly, clearly. It didn't need me anymore. For the first time in my life, distance felt like permission. Days passed, then weeks. The investigation moved forward with a quiet efficiency that felt almost unsettling. Unmarked cars appeared on the street where nothing had ever happened. Men and women walked in and out of the front door carrying folders instead of furniture. The house that once intimidated everyone who entered it now stood exposed, measured, catalogued, stripped of its authority. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. Some whispered. Others pretended not to see. The same people who once admired the house for its permanence now avoided looking at it too long, because permanence had become evidence. Eleanor disappeared from public view almost immediately. Not dramatically, not with confrontation. She didn't fight the narrative. She couldn't. Every attempt to defend herself only revealed another crack, another document, another witness who remembered things differently than she claimed. Control, once broken, doesn't return. I heard fragments about her life afterward. That she stayed with a distant acquaintance for a while. That she tried to access accounts she believed were still hers. That she made phone calls she never would have made before. No one answered. People who build power through fear rarely understand loyalty. And when fear is gone, so is everyone else. The lawyer called me one afternoon, his voice quieter than usual. They found something, he said. I knew what he meant before he explained. Behind the study wall, the last sealed compartment, they found what my mother had been denied the night she left. Her identification papers, her passport, medical records, letters written in her handwriting, some folded so many times the creases had nearly erased the ink. She hadn't packed because she hadn't been allowed to. She hadn't disappeared. She had been cornered. One letter, written on a scrap of paper, stopped me completely. "If you ever read this," it said, "please remember me as someone who tried. Not someone weak, not someone unstable, someone who tried." I sat with that letter longer than I'd sat with any memory of her, and I realized something that hurt more than anger ever could. My mother hadn't lost her place in the family. She had been removed to protect the house. Weeks later, the property was officially listed. No photos of sunlight through windows, no language about warmth or legacy, no promises, just a legal notice. Property under investigation. Full disclosure required. No one rushed to buy it. Some houses carry too much history. Others carry too much truth. I walked past it once, early in the morning, before anyone else was awake. The tree in the front yard was gone, cut down completely. The roots, exposed and rotting, told a story no one had noticed while the branches were still green. Disease doesn't always show on the surface. Sometimes it grows quietly, deep underground, feeding on what it's attached to. I stood there longer than I meant to. I thought about my father, about the man who believed control was stability, about how he confused silence with peace, about the note he wrote too late, hoping words could undo years of cowardice. Guilt explains things. It doesn't fix them. I thought about Eleanor. I didn't visit her. I didn't need closure from her. The house had already taken everything she used to be. Without it, there was nothing left for her to hide behind. And then I thought about myself. I didn't inherit money. I didn't inherit property. I didn't inherit a name anyone would envy. But I inherited something far more dangerous. Freedom. Freedom to remember my mother without shame. Freedom to tell the truth without permission. Freedom to leave without being called a traitor. The lawyer asked me once, gently, if I regretted how everything unfolded. I told him no. Because regret belongs to people who still believe silence would have been easier. That house wasn't meant to be owned. It wasn't meant to be passed down. It wasn't meant to protect anyone. It was built to contain lies. And once those lies were spoken aloud, the house became just what it always was beneath the power and fear and rules. Empty. Some families inherit homes. Others inherit silence. We inherited a lie so heavy that the house itself couldn't hold it anymore. And when it finally collapsed, the truth was the only thing left standing.